Mr. Manny Pacheco.
I want to thank everybody for attending and being part of Forgotten Hollywood, Forgotten History. This is a very exciting evening for me. I've spent 2 months promoting the book, and yesterday we were able to sell our 200th copy of Forgotten Hollywood, Forgotten History, and it's because a lot of the folks here at Mr. B's were very, very supportive, so I knew I had to have a book signing here at Mr. B's, and I want to thank Perry and Rosie Apostle and the staff for having me here, and I think they deserve a huge round of applause for our opportunity to talk about the book. As you know, I have written a book I believe is interesting, informative, and fun. It's called Forgotten Hollywood, Forgotten History. It's a paperback that's loaded with stories and data that up until now have seldom been chronicled and photos rarely seen. Today, I'm going to share with you the reasoning behind writing the book, some of the highlights of the book, a few anecdotes that have occurred during this terrific journey, and I hope that after my discussion, you'll want to spend a couple of evenings with Forgotten Hollywood, Forgotten History. We've also got an actually a video presentation that you can see that's going to go along with what I'm going to talk about. They're up on the screens, and if you don't have a screen that's with the right channel, we'll get those channels up for you. Let me begin by first telling you that I'm a huge history buff, especially anything to do with American presidents. I'm also a big fan of movies from Hollywood's past. I especially love Oscar-winning motion pictures and films of Spencer Tracy and Humphrey Bogart and other giants of the studio era. Any library or school provides the writings of authors who see history in a linear fashion or in the emphasis of one topic. In other words, children today are taught that Columbus discovered America, the Pilgrims headed to Plymouth Rock aboard the Mayflower, the American Revolution was fought for our independence, the issue of slavery haunted us as a nation, and we have fought a Civil War, we've experienced the Industrial Revolution, the Great Depression, 2 World Wars, all in a familiar order. Bookstores are loaded with stories that highlight just one of these eras with specific accounts and twists. And if you love movies of the past, there's no shortage of books that tell the stories of John Wayne, Clark Gable, James Stewart, Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, etc. 3 factors inspired me to write what I think is a surprisingly comprehensive book at Hollywood and history in a way that's not been recently presented. First, I'm not a big fan of reality TV. There's nothing remotely interesting or educational in watching the trials and tribulations of unimportant people in manufactured situations. I have a special distaste for the relative ease that common people have in uttering profanity in front of a camera and crew. TV executives find this a cheap way to provide entertainment for us, and that's what I think it is, cheap and crass. Additionally, recent slashing of funds of the National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities by our elected leaders concerns me. We, the people, are headed in the wrong direction. So, let me remind everybody, I'm not a fan of reality television. Second, I was watching a gentleman named Chris Matthews on his hardball show on cable one day, and he was interviewing a soldier who had traveled from Iraq with the remains of a fallen comrade from his hometown. The soldier kept a diary of his return that he developed into a book. This book became an HBO special that was a really compelling film starring Kevin Bacon. It struck me that anyone could write a book about any subject if you had the heart to put pen to paper. Finally, I was reintroduced to John Adams, not just our second president, but also the compelling story by David McCullough that was made into an HBO miniseries. I bought the box set as a Christmas gift for my father, and when he finished watching it, he loaned it to me. It really was an epiphany. It seemed to be a factual account about a man who lived in the shadow of George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. The story came alive to me, and Paul Giamatti did a brilliant job. John Adams is a great example of a fine historical figure that should never be forgotten. I started writing my book later that week. However, I decided to write about supporting actors of Hollywood's golden age. I realize that little have been documented with regards to these exceptional movie stars that have long lived in the shadow of the giants of cinema. And many times they played historical figures that have also been forgotten or never were emphasized in schools. Yet, the more I watch old movies, the more I find myself paying attention to these character players. And consequently, I find new reasons to love a classic film. These actors deserve their day in the sun. It's like visiting an old friend you haven't seen in a while. I also hope that I can familiarize a whole new generation of folks to these hard-working personalities. I selected 15 uniquely talented individuals, and to my utter delight, I discovered that each chapter captured amazing pieces of our history. What I mean is that even though each story is different, these supporting players kept appearing in movies and lived their lives with a thread of a common purpose. Some of these folks you will recognize, and some of them you'll only know by their faces or the parts they played. For example, the most celebrated character actor, star in Hollywood history, he is the real McCoy. He earned 3 Academy Awards and a centerpiece to the book. We all know Walter Brennan, a true face of the Old West. Incidentally, I start the book with my favorite supporting player, and if I mention Claude Rains, do you remember what movies he appeared? His most notable role was that of the prefect of police in Casablanca. He was Humphrey Bogart's best friend in the film. He spent a career playing the status quo in movies that dealt with revolution. Claude Rains was the loyal opposition in motion pictures that needed his adept ability to play villains. In reality, this British actor became a U.S. citizen in 1939. I based the title of my first chapter, The Loyal Opposition, on familiar vernacular frequently used by Republican Senator Everett McKinley Dirksen. This little-remembered giant of history helped President Johnson pass the Voting Rights Act and the civil rights legislation of the mid-'60s in a bipartisan coalition. He was always cordial to his Democratic colleagues in the Senate and fervently believed that issues could differ across the aisle, yet all were loyal to the principles of the Constitution. I wanted to especially thank the U.S. Senate office for providing me with the wonderful pictures of the Senator Dirksen for use in my book. His portrait hangs in the rotunda of the Capitol building. The story of Lionel Barrymore was an easy chapter to write. His pedigree in film is immense, from a family that was steeped in tradition of actors. What is remarkable about Barrymore is that the body of his work was conducted while he suffered from severe arthritis. He appeared in movies confined to a wheelchair and was a pioneering triumph over disability. Remember, we had a president that hid his affliction of polio from the American people during his 4 terms of office. FDR's robust fireside chats on the radio belied his own confinement to a wheelchair. Harold Russell, the World War II veteran double amputee, could not have co-starred in The Best Years of Our Lives without Barrymore paving the way. Arthur Kennedy is a particular favorite of mine. He was a physical actor who appeared in many Broadway plays and movies that were written by important 20th century authors, including Arthur Miller and Tennessee Williams. Kennedy lived the last years of his life in Nova Scotia and is buried in a cemetery there. Ivan Smith, a local resident from his community, happened to snap a photo of his tombstone. He graciously allowed me its use in my book, and here it is. No actor appeared in more award-winning movies than Ward Bond. He also appeared in more John Ford-directed films than anyone. Yet, I spend a portion of my time writing about Bond's feverish fight against the idea of communism that sent a nation into hysteria after World War II. What is especially tragic is that Bond died just before John Kennedy was elected president during the coldest of wars, while Richard Nixon, John Wayne, and Ronald Reagan were later vindicated in their participation over the Red Scare. And because they lived long enough to see the U.S. emerge as a superpower, Wayne and Reagan have schools and airports named in their honor, while Ward Bond is just a fleeting memory.